Welcome back to the Former Fat Friend podcast. This is Kasey, and I am so excited because I'm here with a very special guest today. He has dedicated nearly 2 decades to helping people on their weight loss journey, both mentally and physically. Dr. Stephen Reyes, also known as Dr. Steve, is a bariatric psychologist who has worked with thousands of patients to achieve lasting health changes. He's affiliated with several Centers of Excellence bariatric programs in Southern California, conducting psychological assessments and running educational classes to prepare patients for weight loss surgery. Dr. Steve is not only an expert in the field, but also a compassionate coach known for helping patients navigate the mental challenges that come with their post-surgical journeys. He has emceed national bariatric conferences, developed pre-surgery curricula used by hospitals, and speaks regularly at weight loss support groups. Today, we will dive into his experience. We are going to explore the psychological aspects of bariatric surgery. We're going to talk a little bit about weight loss stigma and stigma around weight loss surgery. And we're also going to talk about how to prepare you for long-term success if you are a bariatric patient. So, Dr. Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kasey. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I have so many questions for you, but
Sure.
I would love to understand first, how did you decide to pursue a career in bariatric psychology? I know this was something you've studied in your doctoral dissertation research, so this is something that's obviously been an interest of yours for quite some time. What got you into this field?
Yeah. So when I first started, being introduced to the whole world of weight loss surgery, and we're talking like 2004, 2005, there weren't a whole lot of bariatric psychologists running around. And so I had been running some intensive outpatient programs with, the addiction industry and kind of had a reputation in the area where I'm from. And some of the hospitals were looking for people to do psychological evaluations. They didn't know who to go or who to ask or whatever. And I'm pretty open to everything, pretty flexible. I love new challenges and all that. So they said, "Hey, Steve, would you be interested in this?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, what is this? Let me look into it."
Yeah.
And they basically told me that they're looking for someone who could clear these people psychologically. So I had to do some research as far as like, okay, well, what do we need to assess for with the patients before they can proceed? So I did some research into that. And gosh, Kasey, it was like hand in glove for me. Just who I am as a person, my background. I have a background in health sciences, background in marketing, addiction. And personally, I've always been, really into the health just because my own personal journey, and that's a whole nother issue or whatever. But once I was introduced to the bariatric population, I loved it and I loved them. And probably 15,000 people later, here we are. And it's just been, the best experience of my life. And, going back to my education was with weight loss surgery patients. And that by far was the coolest thing I've ever done. So I get to know some people on a real intimate level as far as every facet of their life and their journey prior to having surgery, that after surgery is just so rewarding. So that's how I ended up here.
That's amazing. I'm curious, did you see parallels between your research in addiction and bariatric surgery populations?
Yeah, there's some overlap and some common ground there, for sure, as far as the whole food dependence part, and even from a relational standpoint too, some relational dependent issues too that I would come to discover along the way as I got to know the population more and more. And, in both those areas, and this is something I focus on as a clinician, I typically address both those areas with people, as far as not, I believe not, being healthy is not only about, what we ingest, physical activity, hydration, vitamin compliance and all that too. But very often it's like, okay, well, what, relational issues need to be resolved in our life and what things have we never addressed? And typically once people address those things, that becomes super empowering. And what it does, it allows them to focus on that self-care stuff that they need to be doing for themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It is. I think a lot of people believe bariatric surgery is like just completely about removing part of your stomach, makes you eat less, and like that's
Yeah,
it. But it is
yeah,
so much more than that. And
yeah.
I love that you talk about the relational side of this because I think I think weight and food and eating, it is so relational, and
Mhm.
it's such a mental thing too. And I think that's often ignored by probably both bariatric patients themselves and the general population.
Sure. Yeah. No, you're right. Absolutely on that. Yeah.
So when you talk about the kind of the pre-surgery psychological assessment. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why that's so important?
Yeah, so the facilities that I'm affiliated with, the hospitals and everything, so I pretty much follow all the ASMBS guidelines as far as like what to assess for. So it's not only health history, like I go over like people's eating history, I go over their mental health history, we roll out any substance abuse, any suicidality type of things, and then obviously there's a section about, their knowledge of the surgery and what they're going to have, post-surgery protocol, do they understand the lifestyle, all that. So I literally ask them 101 different questions, and then I give them a battery of tests to fill out too, and it kind of gives us a snapshot of where the patient is prior to pursuing surgery, and some people are just, you can tell they're just super, super invested in the process. They have been since day one. And I wish that was always the case, but unfortunately it's not always the case. And the people who are not prepared, we usually point them to resources that can help them get to that point where they're ready.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is like, what would someone do if they were not cleared? And it sounds like you have, a path for them. So it's not just like, no, you can't have surgery, go home, we'll see you later. But it's kind of helping them work through what they need to work through to be ready for that surgery.
Yeah, for sure.
And so do you also see patients, so the same patients you see for the pre-surgery clearance, do you see them after surgery?
Yeah, I've done private coaching basically my whole career. So
Okay.
I literally see people from all over the country, post-ops and pre-ops too. I mean, people who, those pre-ops who really become really educated and invested and have that awareness of what it takes to be healthy. Oftentimes they'll seek me out as far as, hey, I think I have some stuff that's never been addressed. I think this will help me with what I need to be doing for myself. Would you be open to seeing me? And so, I've been doing that my entire career, and that's really fun for me. And it's probably the most fulfilling thing of what I do too is, seeing people, make all those transformations, from pre-surgery to post-surgery, not only from a physiological standpoint, but a psychological standpoint. When you see that paradigm shift, that mind shift with people or whatever, there's nothing cooler than that, man. I mean, it's so cool to see that,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what you would say are some of the biggest psychological challenges that patients face, especially in those early post-op days.
Yeah, early on, I think, what's interesting, like, because pre-ops will ask me I guess they've always asked me, but I hear it a lot these days. They're like, so, how do you know when how do you know when someone's going to struggle? And if I can overly simplify it, I basically say, well, when people give too much emphasis on what they're missing out of as opposed to the quality of life that they're gaining from the lifestyle, those are the people who can put themselves through torture, and just really, wreak havoc on their psyche, for instance, obviously our culture is very food centric, right? I mean, very food centric. And, not to be discouraging, but the reality is many times when people get to the point where they're going to have surgery, whether they know it or not, they now exist in a culture that's not supportive of their lifestyle. Because what we practice as a culture, the way how we eat, when we eat, and all that is so contradictory, so opposite of what we need to be doing for ourselves, and that's why community is so important, and people like yourself who have, good following where you can educate and empower people is so important because 20 years ago, those folks didn't have that. They didn't have those resources, and so often they literally felt like they were going about their journey alone. And I think the best thing that we can do for people these days is let them know you're not alone in this thing. There's resources you can plug into, there's a whole community out there you can be a part of, and what's great about that, it helps, people alleviate that sense of aloneness, and they're part of something, that tends to be a difference maker for a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine having been on this journey without having the community that I have. And really, the community that understands what I'm going through is completely outside of my immediate, like, in real life kind of community. It's
Yeah,
this whole
yeah,
internet world that I found,
yeah,
which is
absolutely.
sounds crazy, but
Yeah.
it's been so important and so impactful for me. And so I think everyone should find that, whether it's on the internet or in real life or with a coach or support groups, wherever it is, you need community. You cannot do this by yourself.
100%. Absolutely. Yep, for sure.
The other thing I was going to mention is you said, and I like that you said this, that it's when you, if you had to predict the people who are going to struggle, it's the ones that are focused on what they have to give up instead of what they're going to gain. And I get this question a lot on being on social media where people will send me a message and say, I'm really thinking about having this surgery, but I'm so afraid I'm never going to be able to eat chips again.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to give up Coke forever or whatever it is, like
Yeah.
something that they love. And I never know how to respond to those, honestly, because there's a part of me that's like, yeah, well, I'm 3 years out. I eat chips and I drink a
Yeah.
Coke when I want to, and I'm doing just fine. But then there's also a part of me that's like, I was at the point before I had surgery where I said, if I will give up anything forever. Like I am so desperate for a change that I don't care what I have to give up forever. I'm willing to do it.
Hmm.
So what do you think is the balance between like recognizing that there may be some sacrifices, but also like life can return to some state of normalcy?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely believe in the balance concept, for sure. And again, like what, you think about traditional dieting, and hopefully I'm not going off on a tangent here. Hopefully I'm going to bring it back home. But you think about traditional dieting, the whole, cheat day mentality, right? And we've all referred to that at times, and I understand like the concept. And, I remember thinking about this like years ago. I'm like, okay, well, why is it a cheat day? Well, it's only a cheat day because I value that more than what I'm doing,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? And so, so now let's look at food for a second. Food to the body is either fuel or medicine. That's it.
Hmm.
Everything else, we have made it into so much more.
Yeah.
And, the way we talk about food, and I enjoy, we're foodies to some extent. We love going to like a new restaurant and wherever we are when we travel and stuff. We very much enjoy that. But it's not always about the food, and it's not all about the food either.
Hmm.
But that whole notion of like cheating, now, if you think about this for a second, like if we can get to the point where we value all things equally, then the notion of cheating doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
A chip is the same thing as like a chicken breast
Hmm.
to me, right? Same thing, right? It's equal in that sense. Now, once I develop not only a palate, but an appreciation for what that chicken breast does for me, now there's value tied to that,
Hmm.
right? A value that didn't exist prior to that because I didn't understand from a physiological standpoint what that can do for me. And obviously, and you heard probably pre-op and post-op early on, protein, 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 Casey. You're just like, shut up. I don't want to hear any more about protein,
Yeah.
but it's the most important macronutrient we have, and if we can get to the point, and this is where a community kind of comes in too, because the people that will struggle that are overly focused on the chip and doesn't really care about the protein shakes or like the chicken breast or whatever, when they think they're gonna practice this lifestyle alone, it's just wonky, man. It gets all wonky. When you meet 7, 8, 20, 50 other people who are trying to live the same lifestyle to you, it's different. Like
Yeah.
experientially, it's very different for people.
Hmm.
And so back to that whole, concept of cheating. So, if we can get to the point and be open to the concept that, I need to give my body something to work with. In fact, a lot of times what you'll hear me say, if you ever attend any of my groups or my classes or whatever, like I kind of put it this way. I'm like, okay, so, today, what did you give your body to work with? Right? To function.
Hmm.
What did you give your body to work with? And what I've heard from people over the years, like, just unsolicitedly, when people like lock it in and they're able to practice that for a little bit, they experience life so much differently. We feel better. We're less irritable. Are probably nicer. We're probably better looking. Who knows?
Yeah,
When we're able to
totally.
do that, and if you can, give yourself the opportunity to experience that, then you can appreciate it, and then there's that value component, right?
Hmm.
And so once you value that, see, we'll never deviate from things that we value, or we won't deviate from them very long, but we
Hmm.
need to value them. And that, we don't really teach that to people, as far as like eating, we really, really don't, and the
Hmm.
benefits of it. But what we've, and this goes back a long time, like one of the bariatric nurses I worked with too, we would really challenge them on that. Okay, just do a week of this, try it this way and really take notice of like how you feel, how you function. And if there's no improvement, then let us know and you can go back to whatever. And I don't think that ever took place, not once.
Yeah.
Not once. Like people, if they're objective and honest with themselves, are like, okay, there's probably something to this, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. And I've definitely experienced that myself where I've, had periods of kind of going off the rails to so to speak. And what brings me back every time is not the weight, not seeing like, gaining weight on the scale or my pants are
Mhm.
too tight. Honestly, my weight hasn't changed a whole lot. What brings me back is how I feel. It's like
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sleeping well. I'm so tired. I can't keep my eyes open at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
my workouts are awful. Like those are the
Yeah.
things that
Oh my
kind of
gosh.
make
Yeah.
me be like, all right, get it together, girl. And I
Yeah.
think that is because that is what I value now. 3 years
Yeah.
into this process, I value so much what I feel like, and I do recognize that food has like everything to do with that.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a big deal.
So, how do you help people cope with something like emotional eating?
Well, I think always a good question we need to ask ourselves though is okay, well, why do we emotionally eat? And if you look at the origins of it, you know, the, I think this will make sense to you. You go, you think about this way as far as our culture and the way we function and the way we use food. So you have a crying infant. What do you put in its mouth, the baby's mouth? A bottle. You have a fussy 9-month old in the high chair. What do you put on the tray? Right?
Food.
There's crackers or Cheerios or whatever, keep
Yeah.
them occupied. Like my generation, if I got 100% of my spelling test in second grade, I was rewarded with candy. My
Hmm.
little league team wins the game. Guess what? We were taken out for ice cream, or there's pizza, or there's a big bucket of soda after the game or whatever. And
Yeah.
so every stage of development, we learn to associate food with soothing, comfort, and reward.
Mm.
Every single stage. And that is reinforced to us time and time and time and time again. And we all know too, food or making things for other people is a love language for a lot of folks,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like working out of Southern California, the holiday season tamales, that alone is a love language for a lot of people. Like
Yeah.
making tamales for friends and loved ones and like giving them to them.
Yeah.
That is an act of love, and it's just, it's a very cultural thing that, we practice like in certain ways. So, as far as like, why do we emotionally? Well, it's such a, I mean, it's a simple, but yet it's a complex thing because there's so many variables and so many factors in that, and, obviously, for some people, depending on their upbringing and depending on their life experience, they were maybe never had a voice to be able to express how they're feeling or express emotion or express what's going on with them. And they discover food, and food serves as a very convenient distraction, from whatever they're feeling and stuff, especially any emotion of distress. And, we have to be honest, a lot of people aren't safe for us to talk to, and we'll figure that out developmentally, sometimes at a really young age.
Hmm.
In short, people can suck. Sorry, they can suck. Why do we use food? Because people suck. I
Yeah.
mean, just, people aren't always like safe, to disclose and stuff. And so we discover food, and, that's that whole concept of food becoming my friend. I think that's kind of how it develops.
Hmm.
And back to that whole, soothing comfort and reward concept too, like I said, it's not only been modeled, to us developmentally, over the years and stuff, but you think about the world of marketing, every advertisement rather you see in regards to a food product is going to emphasize those things: soothing, comfort, and
Yeah.
reward. You deserve, right?
Yeah.
You deserve fill in the blank. You worked
Yeah.
hard. You had a rough day. And we our vernacular, we talk about it that way, right?
Hmm.
Like, man, I've had like a rough week. I'm taking the wife and kid out. We're gonna go grab some to eat or whatever because I don't feel like cooking. I deserve this or whatever. But we talk that way about like sweets. We talk about that way about alcohol. All those things I deserve.
Yeah.
And it's just something that we really, really practice. As far as specific emotional eating, I always like to know from my folks is that, okay, well, so are you a depression eater? Are you a boredom eater? Are you a stress eater? What have you? And if you can kind of identify those emotions, then we talk about our triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so what makes you feel anxious through the day? Is it the relationship with your boss or a coworker? Is it a situation at work where, you can't act out in the moment there, but when you get home, it's on with the chips, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're binging on those things. I mean, that's what we go to, that was our go-to food for like emotional eating.
Yeah.
So, that would be the start to identify, okay, what emotions and what context do you eat out of? And then, what your go-to foods are,
Mm-hmm.
like I would start there with people.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting. And this might be a tough question to answer, but one thing I often think about is like sometimes people will ask me, like, why did you get so big? What happened? Like, how did you become so obese that you needed weight loss surgery? And
Mhm.
I have no idea. I truly don't. I don't think that I didn't have binge eating disorder. I wasn't like, it didn't have like dramatic emotional eating. I think everyone probably does to some extent, but it wasn't like, problematic emotional eating. So I'm curious if you think, does it matter that we figure out why we gained the weight in the first place to be successful long term, or does that not really matter? Is it more about the habits we put into place after?
Man, I love that question, by the way, because I think that's a great question. I really do.
Yeah.
Because a big part of me, and I'll probably get some flack for this or whatever, like in a sense, I love what you said. Why does it matter at this point?
Yeah.
Why does it matter? Like, do you want to change? Do you want to be healthy? If so, then okay, let's talk about this and let's put together a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I think for people, you think about self-care, and you've probably experienced this, on your journey. And what I've found, I should preface it with this, what I've found over the years, like, the people who I've met over the years, the people who I've interviewed and done evaluations on and all that, they tend to be very, very good about taking care of other people, not so much themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So once they make this decision going forward, they may start doing something that's the most counterintuitive, most unnatural thing for them to do is to focus on themselves or put themselves as a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And you may know, Casey, yourself. I mean, it's one thing to establish that self-care. It's a whole other thing to maintain that in the long run. And you think about the people around you, and we don't talk about this enough either. The people around you, they're used to a certain version of you. So now if you're starting to prioritize yourself and implementing self-care, if you're starting to implement boundaries, you're telling no to other people for the first time, they're gonna be like, "What's going on with her? She's
Yeah.
never told me no before. I don't like this gig. This is not cool, man."
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think what tends to be a big factor in a lot of people sustaining their self-care and sustaining their weight loss is the return of old dynamics many
Mm-hmm.
times. Because if they get resistance from the people around them and they kind of feel a sense of aloneness or abandonment or whatever, we don't like that emotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we'll go back to the old dynamic just to keep the peace many times, and I think that tends to be a factor a lot of times in people sustaining, their self-care is that.
Yeah, well, we know the statistics of divorce after bariatric surgery are so high, and I imagine that's one piece of it is that changing dynamic, and that partner has gotten used to you being one way, and suddenly
Yeah.
you're not, and that's very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, and it's unfortunate too that you think, someone's autonomy would be a threat to a partner.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is because sometimes people, and we all got our stuff, sometimes people want to be needed.
Mm-hmm.
And when they sense that need is going away, they will sabotage the relationship or leave or whatever,
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have fortunately have a lot of really wonderful people in my life who have been incredibly supportive, but I
Hmm.
did have one friendship, falling out with a very good friend. And I can remember this person saying, we liked you better before. And in my head, I was like, well, you liked me because I was a doormat to
Of
you.
course,
And
of
I'm not
course
a
you like me.
doormat
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And
Case in point.
yeah, I think that it was, tough in the moment, but ultimately I think, you know, I'm better for it because I don't have to try to fall back into those old dynamics to maintain something that wasn't working for me in this new lifestyle.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is definitely that's a whole big can of worms, the whole relationship dynamics after weight loss
Yeah.
surgery for sure.
100%. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, one of the things people often talk about post weight loss surgery are issues with body image, and people throw around the term body dysmorphia. Is that something that you encounter in your coaching, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've always done that. And in fact, 4 weeks ago, there was a national conference in Newport Beach, California, the Bariatric Connect conference. And they asked me to do a body image workshop. So I did it both Friday and Saturday. And super, super fun, first of all. Just great people to work with or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was such an amazing thing. And so we talked about kind of the origins of that. How do people, develop this like skewed body image, and then what do we do going forward? And so we teach, some skill sets and some. I'm really big on the psychological aspects of who we are, because the thinking healthy in a psychological way is going to lead to healthy behaving, and our body benefits from that. So I try and make those connections. And so we talk about some tips and some, cognitive exercises, ways of thinking people can do to help them, get to that point. But bottom line is, and statistics are pretty clear on this, the majority of our folks, not only are they great about taking care of other people, are they people pleasers, but the majority of our folks are very self-critical. And so step one is right there. We really hone in and address that, okay, enough of that. How old are you? 36, whatever, 54. Okay. How long have you been criticizing yourself? Okay, you've heard it all. Enough's enough. Stop it. Okay. Knock it off. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is why I think that particular aspect is so important. And obviously it relates to how we feel about ourselves, our body image attitude, right? And that needs to be favorable. So, I basically tell people that, if we continue to practice being self-critical to ourselves, basically what we're telling ourselves is that we're not worth it. And if we're not worth it, we're not going to sustain it.
Yeah.
We won't. Because
Yeah.
we take care of what matters, we need to matter. And so for, my private coaching stuff, a lot of times what that amounts to, or what that looks like, is basically giving somebody their permission to be selfish. Again, to prioritize themselves, to take care of themselves, to talk to themselves like they would anyone else in their life. The standard that they apply to everyone else around them, okay, we need to apply it inward. We need to apply it our way. And those conversations, that dialogue is so important, how people talk to themselves. And jokingly, I'll tell people, watch your language. Watch your language,
Yeah.
just like you would if you had a toddler run around, or, a child, the things you wouldn't say or whatever. Well, you don't need to say that to yourself either. You don't. So, it starts there. It starts with like the messages that you're giving yourself and what you're reinforcing. And it's one thing, the culture and the world, the society around us can have weight bias, but the one I'm most concerned about is the bias against self. Because that's the one we're not privy to. Like I can't look at you and say, Kasey, all right, yeah, I think you got some self bias going on or whatever. You're the only one
Yeah.
who's privy to that.
Yeah. So, one of the things anecdotally I think people say is that what contributes to this like body image or body dysmorphia issue
Mhm.
is that when you lose a massive amount of weight and you lose it very quickly, you end up with a lot of loose skin. And I'm curious what your take is on how plastic surgery impacts body image. Can it be good? Is it bad? Like, what are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, it can be great, and it can be very healthy. As long as somebody doesn't, end up pursuing 40 different plastic, surgeries where it
Yeah.
gets to that point, and the body image dysmorphic folks, they have that. And in the classes, like I talk about Michael Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
and all the work that he had done, and just knowing, about his history and stuff. I like to put it this way: that image he had in his mind, he would have never got to. He would
Yeah.
have never lived long enough to get there, unfortunately. It was so elusive, that body image,
Yeah.
but as far as, and loose skin that's the number one thing for our population, as far as like, being discontent or, body image dissatisfaction. That's the most common thing is that one right there. And so I think from just a practical standpoint, removing that, is important, for people from a mobility standpoint or what have you, that's really, really important,
Mm-hmm.
so like I believe it can be healthy, for sure. But what it boils down to at the end of the day is kind of what I just mentioned about, okay, well, what does your conversation look like with yourself? You have this work done or whatever, but what are you telling yourself? What are the messages that you're giving yourself right now? And what are
Mm-hmm.
you reinforcing to yourself? Because
Yeah.
again, it doesn't matter if you had, a 35-pound penis removed, right? If you're, still telling yourself you're this or that, or you're no good, or you're ugly, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is,
Yeah.
that's still going to interfere with what you need to be doing for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Big hurdle.
Yeah, I have had plastic surgery and I think I've had a very positive experience with it.
Mhm.
But one of my fears going in was like, am I going to ever be happy? Like, am I going to do
Sure.
this one surgery and then feel good about this part, but then start nitpicking everything else and wanting to do like all these other surgeries? And thankfully, that actually was not the case for me. I think I recognize I still have loose skin and I just have kind of decided like, well, my body is never going to look like a person who didn't lose 100 pounds. And that's okay because I'm 38 and life is too short to worry about
Yeah.
what I look like and to be so picky. But
Yeah.
I think it's something you need to be aware of going into plastic surgery is like you aren't ever going to achieve perfection. So if it's something that can, help you feel better
Yeah.
and alleviate some physical pain and make movement easier, like that's amazing. But if you're going in seeking that kind of image in your head that you're never going to get to, that's where I think you might have some concerns.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. And you're right. I mean, the goal isn't perfection, it's progress.
Yeah.
And that's and however you can set your body up or however you can aid your body into taking care of itself is the goal. And I think that the image thing is interesting these days because that whole comparison thing can come in too, or these people, people have an ideal of what they want to look like or what have you. And even the weight loss surgery journey, so often, people will be frustrated because they're not losing weight as this person over here,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be like, dude, you've lost 53 pounds in 4.5 months, but
Yeah.
she's lost 67. Why isn't that working for me? I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you
Yeah.
mean? It is working for you, And it is. I mean, what they say is true. Comparison is the thief of joy,
Yeah.
And I think often what comparison also does too, comparison blinds you from recognizing the good in yourself as well, when
Mm.
we practice
Yeah.
that, and that's not fair to ourselves, and so I'll remind our folks that, you guys remember, obesity is multifactorial.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different factors. And so the person you're comparing yourself, first of all, they have different genetics, I guarantee it, because they're not related to you. They have different genetics, and there's all
Yeah.
these different factors that can play into that. And so once you kind of lay that out or whatever, I mean, it's just not a fair comparison at
Yeah.
all. It's just,
I, I think that's the one downside of community. Like it's so important and you need to find your community, but it does create this kind of natural space for comparison.
yeah,
And I think a lot of it early on is just that everything is so unknown and you're so worried that
yeah,
you're doing something wrong. Or I
yeah,
can't tell you how many times I was like, oh, did I like ruin the surgery? Did I eat so much that I've like completely undone
yeah,
everything that my surgeon did? And so you're constantly looking for those markers to say like, yes, I'm on the right track, or like, this person was at this weight at this time period and now look at them like a year later. So I think a lot of it stems from that like uncertainty and trying to find benchmarks to compare yourself to.
yeah,
But it does steal so much joy from the
yeah,
journey when you
yeah,
do that. And I would encourage people to just really focus on yourself. And before you say, oh, I've only lost 50 pounds, think about like, when is the last time you lost 50 pounds? Also, 50 pounds is a lot of weight. Try
yeah.
carrying 50 pounds on your back and
Oh
tell
my
me that's not
gosh.
impressive?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, totally. We had this gentleman, love this guy. His name was George. This is years ago. And he used to attend one of our in-person groups. And, we go around the room, introduce ourselves so we knew where everyone was on their journey. And when we got to George, George would always say, hey, my name's George. and I had the gastric sleeve. I remember this because it's so ingrained in my head. And he would say, and I've only lost, I'm 14 months out, and I've only lost 89 pounds. Two weeks later, a month later, he'd be there. He'd introduce himself. He'd say, "Hi, my name's George. I had the gastric sleeve, 15 months ago, and I've only lost 91 pounds." Well, he was doing his only thing up to like 121 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
And these two women, I love these ladies. They're like, George, stop the only. Dude, you've lost 121 pounds.
Yeah.
And he was like, only? What? Like, what do you mean? George, when you introduce yourself, you're saying, I've only lost 121 pounds. He's like, well, it's only 121 pounds. I want to lose 140 or whatever,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they got him to agree that he would no longer use only in his introduction. And so a month later, 2 weeks later, whatever it was, when he was there, and everyone was watching George. So we get around the room and George says, "Hi, I'm George. I had, sleeve 18 months ago at that point, whatever it was." And he says, "I've lost 140 pounds. And then he goes, "And I think it's working. I think it's going to work." It's like, dude, but yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, God love him. He was such a great guy. But, and so like part of him just couldn't totally let himself embrace it or, whatever. But yeah, I mean, he was rocking it. I mean, he was absolutely rocking it, and that was so plain to all of us around him. But for himself, he believed like 80% of it, but not fully, type of thing. So
Yeah. Well, I think I can relate to that so much because I think when you've been chronically obese your entire life, like all of your experience is failure up until bariatric surgery. So it's like, it is so hard to believe that it's working. And I was absolutely convinced that I was going to be the one person that bariatric surgery would not work for. I didn't tell anybody that I was having surgery because I was like, well, there's nothing more embarrassing than saying I'm having weight loss surgery and then I don't lose any weight. So I kept it this big secret because I had so many times of trying and failing that it was really hard to believe that it was going to work. And it does take a long time. I mean, it didn't take me quite as long as George to realize that like, yeah, this is actually working. But I can understand that feeling. And actually Allie, who is, she's not here tonight, but one of our co-hosts, she has said this before that like, she's like, well, I could still fail. Like I'm not out of the woods yet.
Right.
And I'm like, I get what you're saying, totally. But also like, you're over a year out, you've lost all of the weight that you wanted to lose. Like you're doing it. You're doing the thing.
Yeah. That belief, is a, it is a scary thing. It's a vulnerable thing for people.
Yeah.
Right. To fully, like embrace, that, okay, yeah, like, I did this, which is great. And, we do. We think we're going to jinx ourselves as soon as I utter that sentence. Tomorrow I'm just going to, fall off the wagon here,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also, I will just say another plug for community. I think part of what has kept me successful in maintaining my weight loss is that having community makes the fact that I am a bariatric patient always at the forefront of my mind. And I think that's so important to not forget that this is part of my life now and it will be forever. And it really helps it's like a sense of accountability almost, or just, it gives me that extra, I don't know, awareness that I think is what has helped me maintain now for, however many years it is.
No.
So we talked a little bit about George and his desire to lose 140 pounds, and it made me think about the idea of goal weights. And when people go into surgery, they often have, a set number of pounds they want to lose or a weight they want to reach. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of bariatric patients, they don't ever get there. So how do you help people kind of figure out realistic goals and kind of set expectations around that goal weight so that they do achieve success, but don't feel like they failed because they didn't get to some number that they put in their head?
Right. No, absolutely. And again, back to that value thing I alluded to earlier, sometimes I think success needs to be measured by like the lifestyle you're practicing and the habits. Do you still have that commitment? Do you still have that ownership? Are you practicing things deliberately, and are you engaged in healthy living? Like, are you, are you still doing all those things? Those are markers of success, and as far as, the weight issue, and again, we give so much power to what that scale tells us.
Yeah,
So much power, way more power than what it deserves. And that can be a head trip for like a lot of people, you know,
totally.
for sure, and it definitely becomes problematic when that, is the sole indicator of success for people,
Hmm.
and what I was saying earlier, for some people, once they hit like a plateau, they're stayed there for a while, and we kind of assess their patterns, their behaviors, their eating, and, what's taking place, and, they've been pretty consistent. The body's just at rest for now, and
Hmm.
sometimes the body does that, and I think many times, when people hit those plateaus along the way, especially that first 12, 18 months, I think sometimes the body's just kind of saying, hey, I'm still not sure if I can trust this.
Hmm. Yeah,
And you think about
yeah.
traditional dieting, and every traditional diet, there's always a plateau phase, right?
Hmm.
And when you hit that plateau, a lot of times what happens is people are like, well, gosh, it worked the first 60 days or 90 days here. Why isn't it working now? They get frustrated, and then they go back to their old behaviors,
Hmm.
right? And people who have done chronic traditional dieting over the years, I think sometimes we train our bodies, this is going to sound a little weird maybe, but we train our bodies to think that, okay, well, there's a certain point we get to, and then we deviate, we go back, and I think those markers, those plateaus along the way, I think sometimes that's going on with the body. It's like
Yeah.
the body's like, okay, well, we're good for now, and you've been giving me what I need, so I've been releasing what I have.
Hmm.
Will this continue? And so the body kind of sits there just to see what our response is. And then, when people are consistent, and this is we used to track this all the time, back in the day, like we found around the 3, 4 month mark post-op was like a big plateau time for people.
Hmm.
And so 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, what was happening with people, they hit that plateau. And so what do they start thinking? Oh, I need to go in deficit mode. I need to decrease my calories. And
Yeah.
we're like, And you find out they're only getting like 60 grams of protein at that point. We're like,
Hmm.
let's crank that up a little bit. As soon as
Yep.
they crank it up, the body's like, oh, okay, you're giving me what I need again. So then it releases what it has, and that breaks them out of that plateau. But
Yeah.
that whole
Interesting.
diet, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The dynamic's interesting, because we've been trained to think that well, calories in, calories out. Well, if I eat less, then I have to lose weight, and that's not always the case. I think it becomes a metabolic trust issue for our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting.
Mhm.
I do want to switch gears a little bit because I want to
Yeah.
talk about weight bias, weight stigma. So we often hear that bariatric surgery is the easy way out, or that you cheated, you paid
Mhm.
someone to make you lose weight. What are some of the things that I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I'd also love to hear what are some of those that stigma or those biases that you encounter in your patients?
Yeah, so as far as like the easy way out thing, usually that comment's made out of someone being naive. They don't understand the whole thing, and I'm being
Yeah.
very nice when I say that. And and I've probably I've probably lost friendships out of that comment over the years. I'm sure I
Yeah.
have. Even from professionals, like medical professionals, and I'm like, you don't get it. Sorry, you don't get it. But here's how I like to answer that, and here's how I view the bariatric lifestyle. For anyone to be successful, you are now, back to the profile of like a typical weight loss surgery patient, the bell curve of people. I call them self neglectors. Like I said earlier, obviously they're great at taking care of other people, not so much themselves. But the
Hmm.
number one behavior and I've been tracking this since day one, so almost 20 years. I've been tracking this since day one. The number one behavior that patients engage, or pre-surgery patients engage in, is skipping meals. Number one. And
Interesting.
there's a study done a few years ago by the ASMBS, and they identified the top 6 behaviors that patients regain in or engage in that contribute to weight regain after surgery. Number one was going back to skipping meals.
So interesting.
Number one. And the statistics that I've been tracking or whatever, it's over 75%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that high. And there's no other behavior, no other thing that people practice that comes close to that one. skipping
Interesting.
meals. Yeah. And so, that's just one facet. So as far as like, it being the easy way out, you think about it this way. For anyone to be successful, more times than not, they have to stop practicing behaviors they've been practicing for years, in some case, decades.
Hmm.
I want you to try that. You tell me if you can do that. You tell me if you can do that, and then you tell me if that's the easy way out. And
Yeah.
again, existing in a culture that's encouraging you to practice those old behaviors, not the
Hmm.
ones that you're doing now, but the ones you've always done. You try doing that. You tell me that's the easy way out. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you said that existing in a culture that is counter to those new behaviors because it's so true. I think, you go out and I don't really drink alcohol anymore. It's a very
Mhm.
rare occasion when I do, but it's often like, I think now my friends know and they don't care, but it's often like, oh, you're not having a drink? Like, why don't you just get a glass of
Yeah.
wine? Or like,
Yeah.
just have one. And it's
Yeah.
somehow it's like offensive to other people when your lifestyle doesn't fit with
Yeah.
theirs. And it's so true that we live in a world and a society that values food and eating and alcohol and drinking, and when your lifestyle changes, you're now bumping up against all of those norms with all of the people that you want to spend time with, and that is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the social eating is a whole, component of that, trying to, just counter that, like you just mentioned, whether it's alcohol or going out to eat, and we've always taught like our patients this at the hospitals and stuff that, we used to really emphasize it around the holiday eating season because, we'd always encourage them whenever you go to a social gathering or outing, make sure you're not empty-handed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you come to my house, Casey, and you don't have something in your hand, guess what? I'm probably going to make you a plate and I'm going to offer you a drink. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, we tell them to be preemptive, so grab a plate, throw some cheese cubes on there, whatever, a cracker or two or whatever, salami, just to give the appearance that you're participating and then have something in your other hand, even if
Hmm.
it's just water with lime, I don't care. Just so it's there,
Yeah.
be preemptive in that way because that will help you not to be in that position where somebody's going to, peer pressure you to want something that you don't want to have type of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
whenever we can, always take control of the context, always take control of the situation. You be in control of the situation. Don't leave it to other people. And, how we do that is by being preemptive like that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's good advice.
Hmm.
I want to go back to something you were talking about, the skipping meals as being an
Hmm.
important predictor of regain.
Hmm.
Have you found data on what predicts long-term success with bariatric surgery?
Yeah. Well, we know, and this is, a little, part of what we're trying to do and we've always done. So, the information and research that I've done over the years, I refer to it as like trend proof. And so what I mean by that is kind of like principles and is almost a paradigm, a way of thinking that can weather the storm of whatever the current cultural trend is as far as the world of dieting and weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to live in that cycle. There's always going to be something going on or whatever, and people who are frustrated with their bariatric journey are going to be susceptible to, whatever those things are,
Mm-hmm.
and in my opinion, as far as what's going to help people be successful is and this is where that study that I alluded to earlier, the ASMBS kind of confirmed it for me, is the behaviors that they identified, the top 6 that contribute to weight regain, are easily the most common things that people practice prior to having surgery. So I have this little coined term, the Steveism, that I made up, and it goes like this. The return of our former behaviors only has one destination, and that's where we came from.
Mm. Yeah.
And so everyone has a different eating profile.
Mm-hmm.
So with my folks, like if you have a strong history of like skipping meals or going long periods without eating, I want you to counter that influence going forward. And I want you to be, intentional and deliberate about your eating patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and I use the word preemptive a lot.
Yeah.
I use preemptive and proactive a lot. And so, I teach people, how to preemptively eat, and case in point, like example of that is, you think about any of us who have a history of skipping meals, or when any of us have gone long periods without eating, eventually our blood sugar level drops, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that drops, anything looks good to us. right?
Yeah.
I'll eat the stack of papers on my desk, so some salsa on it. I'll eat it. I promise you, I will down it. But
Yeah.
I put myself in that position. So I'm like, okay, so what do we need to do? We need to be preemptive.
Yeah.
So what I've found and what patients have told me they've discovered too, and what they've experienced is that when they stay ahead of their hunger, when they give their body what it needs, it doesn't tell them what it wants.
Mm.
And those are two different things.
That's so cool. I have never heard that term before, preemptive eating, and I love that. I think that makes so much sense. And I think anyone, bariatric patient or not, can relate to that feeling of like where you wait too long and you're like,
Yeah.
I need food right now and I don't care what it is. And it does kind of limit your ability to be really intentional about
Yeah.
what you eat because you're just in this like desperate, like give me everything kind of mode. But being preemptive with your eating
Yeah.
makes so much sense.
Yeah, hunger should never be an afterthought. You
Yeah.
know, and so back to all the people that I've interviewed over the years who, report, skipping breakfast or skipping meals, they'll say, well, I'm just not hungry in the morning, or I don't eat until I'm hungry. And then what do they eat at that time? And what we found not only in the bariatric world, but in the culture in general, people who have that history of like skipping meals, they will eat the same amount of calories. They just start later in the day.
Mm. Yeah.
So not as efficient to the human body, right?
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, so it's just it just looks completely different. So I would tell people whatever your history is, you want to be very careful about going back to those things,
Hmm.
those
Yeah. Makes a
behaviors.
lot of sense. Well, Dr. Steve, you have a book coming out this
Hmm.
year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that book is?
Yeah, so pretty excited about this thing. Thank you. It's called the Bariatric Code, and basically what it does is provide people just a resource that they can turn to time and time again to put their mind where it needs to be. And so there's testimonials from patients, there's stories, there's quotes. I'm a quote guy. You got to be careful you ever talk to me because if I have pen in my hand, I'm probably quoting you or something.
Yeah.
I just love good quotes and the way people spin things and the way they say things. Sometimes they'll just say it's so profound, and I just love those moments. So the book has a lot of those in there, but just some good practical information. And more than ever, too, I think it gives people like a paradigm they can come back to as far as like, I like to refer to our mindset as our operating system, right? And when that's clicking, when that's where it should be, we function so differently, and so, operating out of that, healthy mindset is just such an important thing. But, there's actually we call it living to the code, and the wait, my phone here. So the code is in the bariatric code is basically this, and so that body image workshop that I mentioned earlier that I was able to speak at. So when I was telling the people about the upcoming book and what they just experienced is actually in that, and some of the workshops that we have coming. I put up on the screen the self-care pledge. And the self-care pledge is made of the code, CODE, and it goes like this. It says, I commit to self-care, taking ownership of my life, being deliberate in all things by engaging in healthy living. And so with that, you see the CODE. And so, I encourage people like to live that code. And I think for any of us to be healthy psychologically, spiritually, physically, mentally, relationally, it requires that. And so we kind of touch on all those different facets, all those different aspects, self-care for people to, continually practice from here forward.
That's awesome. And that's such an important resource for our community. I'm very excited to hear that's coming out, and we'll definitely keep our listeners updated when it does. Dr. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I love your perspective on bariatric psychology and the bariatric life. I have to be honest, I think it's a very unique and refreshing perspective from what I often hear. And so I'm so glad we were able to have you on. And I learned so much. I hope our listeners learned so much. If people want to find you, can you share where they can find you online?
Yeah, so you can go to like our website to get any information on me and some of the things that we're doing in the book. So it's just drstephenreyes.com. And then my main social media is Instagram, and it's Dr. period Stephen Reyes. So you can find me on there. And just so you guys know, any groups, support groups that I do, because I still facilitate support groups, if we ever advertise those, if you guys are ever interested in jumping in, let us know. We'll send you the link because all mine are open. So.
Fantastic. Well, we will put all of those links in the show notes for you guys. And if you want to find the podcast, we are on social media at Former Fat Friend Pod. I'm at Maintaining Kasey. And Dr. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I know I enjoyed this, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So we will see you all next time.
Thank you, Kasey. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.